and welcome back to Coach Quip. I'm Coach Robyn.
I'm Coach Chris.
And today we're talking about talking. Literally talking. Talking while you run. Something that we call the talk test. And really why chatting is a super tool when it comes to your training. And you're like, what? But we'll get into it. If you've ever gone for a run with others, which I'm assuming if you're identifying as a runner, you probably have. Mm-hmm. Chances are you've talked for part of it, right? Or maybe all of it, depending how hard it is. And we know that sometimes we talk a little bit more, like on easy days, right? When things are a little bit more aerobic. And sometimes we talk a little bit less, like when it is windy, like it was this morning, straight into the wind. I'm like, woof, right? Or when it's speed work or hill work. It's pretty cool that this tool is a real thing, right? Because it's something that we do naturally, but it's also going to be a great gauge for our training. But before we get to what the talk test is and how to do it, we want to talk a little bit more about chatting and some of the benefits of chatting on the runs. First one, this is not going to be surprising, but it's great distraction and motivation, right? I know, man, if I have to go out on my own, it's so much harder, especially on an easy run for some reason, than when I'm running with someone. So talking with a buddy can make the time pass really, really fast, especially during longer runs. I like it actually during challenging runs, which we'll get into, like a tempo run, because it is a grind, right? You don't have to have long conversations, but just even the ability to exchange words and humanity, knowing that someone else is suffering with you, is very important. And not surprisingly, part of this is accountability too. You know that we have others showing up. We know that we have connected with them most likely in the past. And we're a lot more likely to show up and do the work alongside them if there's that social component.
Yeah, it's funny. You are like, if you have to run alone, you're like, this sucks. And I do most of my training alone. So when I run with other people, I'm like, oh, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
This is so much easier than what I'm doing every day.
I think it's hard, though, because there is a need for some athletes to really want to train alone because it's their alone time, it's their me time. We see this a lot, honestly, with parents who are like, I just need 30 minutes to myself, which I totally get. Use that. But especially as you go and add in distance or intensity, you know, having people to talk with and exchange words with really can, you know, elevate things and make things easier. There's nothing sadder to me than when someone says, I trained for my first marathon, but I did it alone. I'm like, oh, on the long runs, you did 18 miles alone in the summer? Like maybe once in a while I'll do that, but oh my goodness, that would be hard.
Yeah, I think those people just don't know the magic of training with other people, right? Which brings us to number two, a benefit of talking on the run is that social connection. So really just using that time to be in community with other people who are like-minded, who are interested in something that you're interested in. It's calming. It provides a sense of relaxation from your normal life.
Yep. And on that social connection piece, there's actually a lot of research that how just simply moving with other people, right, whether that's like dancing or weightlifting or riding or running, it really starts to foster connection and calmness and stimulates that parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest, chill the hell out, which is not easy to do living in a city. So I'm a big Nature Fix girl. Shout out Florence Williams, right? I love that book. It's my top 3 ever books. Part of that is how being in nature helps reset that same nervous system. But if you can do it somewhat with running with others, you don't even have to leave the city. Third, I love this one because it's like super sneaky. It's breathing, getting your breath control better, and increasing lung capacity. All running is how effective are you at using oxygen throughout your body. We're going to get a little bit more into that with the talk test. So when we talk about talking while running, you know, you're going to become more aware of your breath if you are having to talk at the same time, and you're going to learn, hopefully, to control it more effectively. I tend to be super stoked as a coach when I run up on runners, especially in hot, humid summer long runs. And we're like 2/3 of the way into, let's say, a 15-mile run, and people are still, I'm just lurking like a creep behind them, right? And they are just chatting and chatting and chatting. I get very excited because I'm like, wow, they're holding the pace that they need to pace. They're having this full-blown conversation, which means they are controlling their breath, and they are ultimately using and distributing oxygen better. So, those aerobic adaptations are happening.
And we know this is true because we've probably all seen the viral clips of like Miley Cyrus on the treadmill.
Oh yeah, and Taylor Swift using it, right?
Yeah, Taylor Swift.
Great point.
Famously, running and singing, and so like it is all about breath control, and it's what professional singers and musicians use as a tool to control their breath, which is essential to their jobs. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Wow, we could be Miley Cyrus.
Yeah, you could be Miley Cyrus.
I want to see more of these clips now.
Mm-hmm. And finally, and this leans into the talk test, it's great for assessing your pace and your intensity. So when I first started coaching, one of the coaches that I worked with would have our athletes do the Mary Had a Little Lamb test.
Ooh.
while we were running, and seeing like how much they could say, and using that they had like this equivalent to, if you could say a full sentence, you're in this zone.
Yep.
If you had half, which is our talk test, right? So this has been used by coaches for forever as an indication. So beyond heart rate, beyond times, we can tell a lot from using our breath.
Yeah, and it's a great variable. We'll get into why.
Yep. Okay, so you've mentioned the talk test a couple of times. What is it?
Oh, let's talk about that talk test. So it effectively helps you determine what level of intensity you are going at, right? Based on your breathing patterns and your ability to speak, right? Mm-hmm. Something that we have to do while we run or do any aerobic activity, right? Any cardio is breathe, and if you're around others, possibly speak. Mm-hmm. So on the nerdy side of things, everything comes down to the type of fuel your body's using and its byproducts. So it's, creating different proportions at different intensities. When you exercise, let's talk mostly about oxygen and carbon dioxide. When you exercise, your body uses oxygen. We know that. That's what we breathe in. And you breathe it in to use it for energy and break down fat. Mm-hmm. But your body also, of course, as you exhale, generates carbon dioxide. And you're going to always release that on the exhale. You do overall, especially at aerobic levels, you're going to make less CO2 than oxygen you're taking in at slower speeds, right? We know that, right? We're taking in more oxygen, we're breathing out a little bit less carbon dioxide, so breathing is easier, right? Mm-hmm. As you increase your intensity, the ratio of oxygen needed and the amount of CO2 you produce starts to get more proximate and proportional. So this shifts your breathing patterns because you're effectively producing more CO2 and having to take in, obviously, oxygen because you're still having to do work. Right, so as we increase speed, we are needing to exhale more and more carbon dioxide, which then in turn have us breathing more rapidly. That's the basis of the talk test. It's very common sense, mm-hmm. but I think it's also why people are scared of running fast, because you get into that rapid breathing and it feels more laborious. I like to think about like, oh, I'm exhaling all that carbon dioxide. It's got to be, right? There's a reason.
Is that really what you think about?
Yeah.
You're so nerdy.
Well, when you get like freaked out by it, especially if you're alone. If you're with others, you can kind of just go with the flow because you hear them breathing fast too. But when you're on your own, you're like, oh my goodness, I am ragged right now. There's a reason for it.
So we have 3 different levels of intensities that you can use with the talk test that are pretty common here. So for our low intensity workouts, these are the ones that you mentioned. We often call them chat pace, right?
Yeah.
And that's because we want you to be able to carry on a conversation with almost no difficulty at all. We are running, we are able to complete sentences and
saying Mary had a little lamb,
right? But not just that. Its fleece was white as snow. And being able to continue on in that conversation and not feel like you're gasping for breath. This is the sort of pacing for warm-ups and cool-downs that we find is really great. And we love that for the social connection that you get in the warm-up and the cool-down, to be able to make those connections before you do really tough work, especially on those speed workouts. And this is probably the baseline pace for your easy runs or regular runs. So this is your marathon plus 30 to 90 seconds should be in that chat pace where we can chat the entire time.
Yep. This is also making up like 80% of your training if you're in like a half or full marathon training build, which is not only a great opportunity to catch up with others, but when we talk about mitochondrial density, right, increasing the rate at which we are able to uptake oxygen, it is this same zone that you are building up that bank account the most, which is like win-win-win, right? 80% of runs in this zone, we can still have full-blown conversations and not be out of breath and feel like garbage. And there's an awesome aerobic adaptation happening. So please, sweet baby Jesus, do not run your easy runs too fast because you're missing out on everything.
Yes.
Okay, the first one was low intensity.
Yep.
Second, you saw this coming, was moderate intensity. So you're going to notice a shift in your breathing. We all know this, right? Your ability to speak is going to get a little bit reduced. You can still talk in short sentences with a few words at a time. I say up to 5. So Mary had a little lamb. You're going to get through lamb,
Yep.
right? Full stop. But it's going to be more challenging and a little bit more uncomfortable. That's normal. So for me, this is a perfect example of a tempo run where you're getting to that intensity where you can say, half mile until the water fountain, and then that's about it. But you're going to have to take more turns. So usually speaking, right? Like you say 5 words, wait a second, I say 5 words, right? You're not going to have that kind of ongoing dialogue where you're not having to monitor or share conversation as much.
Yep. And then we move into high intensity workouts. So this would be your 1 to 2 words at max.
Yep.
This is
Grunting.
very difficult. You can communicate your discomfort.
Yes.
But in terms of this example that we're using here, this would be Mary, breath, had a breath, right? So like we are really just chunking out our sentences. And at this pace, you are not intended to talk. You are intended to work hard.
Yep.
And that's a good measurement to say, yes, I am working hard here. So this would be your 5K or mile efforts, our shorter speed work. And it's nearly impossible to communicate at that point.
As a coach, we also know this is when you stop making eye contact with us, right? For real though, like especially at the end of a workout when you're really, really spent, if you go by me and I'm shouting a cue and you do not talk to me, you do not respond and you don't make eye contact, yay, high intensity has been achieved.
Yeah.
The cool part about the talk test, right, we've got that low, moderate, and high intensity checks. It's literally that simple, but it's not just a training tool. So it actually can be used to keep you on track on race day, right? Mm-hmm. So if you know that you might go out too fast and we need you to be a little bit more progressive with your effort, you're going to set your pace. But if you're in downtown Chicago and your watch is all wild, you can also just turn to the person next to you and maybe say a sentence or two and make sure that you're aerobic enough in the beginning part of a race to not go out too fast. And then sure, the last 10K of the marathon, we don't need you saying more than a couple words. We know that you're spent. That is an appropriate place. But if you start half marathon even and you cannot get out a word or two in the first few miles, you need to dial it back. So it's a great training tool too.
I love this. I just imagine our runners just looking at a random stranger and being like, do you like pickles on your pizza?
Yes,
just, please, when you do this, find the most random sentence to say. So the other great thing about this is no equipment is needed. We have a lot of tools to measure our progress. Yep. We have our watches telling us if we're deconditioned or our fitness is improving. We have things like Whoop. We have all sorts of metrics in our training plans and whatnot. But this is one that in real time you can assess your output, and it can vary day to day, right? So like we know the talk test at a pace on perfect conditions, it might feel easy breezy. And if we're in tough conditions like the wind, you said,
it scales.
Right? It scales. And so you can scale your effort using this tool that's just internal to you.
Second, it's pretty accurate, right? Not necessarily relative to pace or anything, but it is pretty accurate. It's a very primal part of, again, it's the basis. How well are you moving oxygen around and intaking it, right? In comparison to things like heart rate monitors or RPEs, which is pretty subjective, the talk test a lot of times can be more reliable because it's not influenced by other variables like dehydration or levels of stress as much. So, you know that heart rate might go crazy, but if all of a sudden you're like, yeah, but my breath rate is the same, rely on that one as a really great metric, hence why the talk test is so powerful.
Yeah, and it's easy to implement, so you don't need fancy gear. You literally just need to say something out loud, and you can do it even if somebody's not with you. People might look at you funny, but you can also test without a friend.
I really like this one too compared to RPE. So, RPE is rate of perceived exertion, which it is subjective, but a lot of times newer runners or runners running new distances or intensities, it takes them a while to really understand where on that 10 or 20 point scale they fall in RPE, because they're like, oh, my lungs are burning, oh, my legs are burning, oh, my feet are hurting, right? And they might artificially put themselves high or low depending on the day. Mm-hmm. But the talk test is just focusing on one aspect of your running process, which is ventilation, and that one is real simple and real consistent. So the next time that you head out with your running pads, chat it up, obviously more so on the easy stuff than the hard stuff, but use the power of the gab, right, for all of that awesome intel on how your intensities are going, and really truly the ability to maximize those fitness gains.
Yep. So when you see us out there, say hi.
Sing Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Thanks for listening to Coach Quip. Original music performed by Ment. Follow us online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edge Athlete Lounge. Our podcast lives in the blog section of our website. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and you can check out the show notes for additional ways to contact us. Ready, set, onward we go.